I had some bone spurs on my neck that I got from sports injuries when I was young. So I had a lot of pain in my neck. And I found a very famous doctor in Pittsburgh that does what's called a foraminal anatomy. So instead of cutting the back of your neck open, and then for the rest of your life, they fuse your discs together, and for the rest of your life you're in pain. This doctor developed this foraminal anatomy where they go into the front and they make a slight slit in your neck and they move your esophagus aside. And then he goes in and he drills out these bone spurs. So people from all over the world come to see this doctor. So I went to Pittsburgh and I had this operation done, and you only stay in the hospital for one night. Came back to North Carolina, and 4 days later in my bed at 11 o'clock p.m., I had a massive heart attack. Now, in retrospect, my transplant team, we all know what happened. I threw a blood clot, or a piece of plaque broke loose, and it went directly into my widowmaker. My wife didn't know what was going on at the time. At 11 p.m., I have a special needs child. We thought maybe it was my daughter having a seizure. There was a lot of confusion when you're woken up in the middle of the night. She realized it was me flopping around in the bed screaming. I passed out from the pain. Don't remember the ambulance ride, none of it. Thank goodness we're only about 3 miles away from the hospital. They realize I'm having a massive heart attack. I get into the ER. They give me some blood thinners, my wife tells me, some meds to stabilize me. And then they put me in a room next to the ER, and a nurse is in there with my wife saying, okay, we've called the cardiologist. We've got some medicine in him. He's stable. So we'll just wait until the cardiologist comes. But right now we're good. Well, right after she said that, I sprang forward on the gurney. My eyes popped wide open. And as my wife said, it was kind of like a scene from the movie The Exorcist. It was almost as if somebody had grabbed me by my shirt and pulled me forward with great force and from the waist up. So I sprang up, my eyes popped open, and I screamed out the name Frosty. Now, Frosty is the nickname of my brother in law. So I scream out Frosty. I collapse backward on the gurney. I flatline, code blue rings out throughout the hospital, and in rush a team of doctors to start working on me. Now, what's curious about this is that my wife's in the room, she's panicked, but the doctor comes in, who is a beautiful little Indian woman, Dr. Patel, who I'm now very good friends with. But she tells Dr. Patel, we have a special needs child. You have to save my husband. She cannot make it without him, and I can't do this alone. So my wife is taken out of the room. Dr. Patel and her team begin to work on me. And I have to tell you that I was flatlined for 20 minutes. They could not resuscitate me, and they did everything. They did 4 times. They stuck the needle with epinephrine into my heart. They did paddle shocks. They did vigorous sternal rubs. They did the whole thing. I was not coming back. Something compelled her to continue to work on me. So finally, she didn't give up. She obtained a very slight pulse. And in the meantime, the cardiologist arrived. They did an emergency catheterization through my thigh, and they found the blockage, and they put 2 stents into my widowmaker. Unfortunately, the damage had already been done, and I had gone into cardiogenic shock. Another doctor came in, Dr. Carson, and intubated me. And before you know it, I slipped into a 4-day coma. On the 4th day, Dr. Carson approached my family. My brothers were there, my wife was there, and he said, look, we can't wait any longer. During this 4-day period, they had sent in neurologists to see if I were brain dead. I was raised Catholic. My oldest brother called the local parish priest. He came in, anointed me with oil, and gave me the last rites. In the Catholic faith, we call that extreme unction. You only get that once in your life to prepare you to go to heaven. And they decided that on the fourth day they couldn't wait. They said, look, we're going to pull the tubes out. If he breathes on his own, great. If not, we have to let him go. So they started to pull the tubes out. It's kind of a funny story. And I started choking. And this was the first time that I figured out that something wasn't right. I mean, it was like looking through a fishbowl, and I hear this nurse saying, if you don't breathe on your own, I can't pull these tubes out. You have to breathe on your own. And I said, look, I'm drowning here. I'm drowning on my own spit. I don't know what's happening. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. So finally, we got through that process. They were able to suction everything out, and they pulled the tubes out. My wife came to my bedside, and she said that I was talking like a child, with this high pitched voice. And she approached the bed, I said, Melanie, you have to believe me. You have to believe me. It was your brother, Frosty. Frosty came to me. And she said, oh my God, Rob, that makes total sense. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, you had a massive heart attack. We brought you into the ER. And all of a sudden, you sprang forward off the gurney. You shouted Frosty's name. And then you fell backwards and flatlined. And that's when you died. And she said, so it all makes total sense. And she said, tell me exactly what Frosty said to you. And I said, he said, I made a big mess out of things, and I want you to go back and help clean things up. But tell my family I'm in a good place. 7 weeks before I died that night, my brother-in-law had taken his life via suicide. And Frosty was about 50, 56 or 57. He was going through a divorce. He was living in the upstairs bedroom in his parents' house. He has one daughter. She was in college. He had his own business, a surveying business. And, that time of year, there's a lot of pressure to pay bills. His daughter's in college, how to pay her bills. And Frosty had had a drug problem, but he had been clean for about 5 years. And that night, he just couldn't take it anymore. He decided to go out and just blow off some steam, thought he'd do it one more time. And unfortunately, he picked up a drug, a very, very odd drug that drives you crazy for like 40 minutes. It was called flakka. It was imported from China. He thought it was crack, and it drove him mad. And he got home that night and went up to his upstairs bedroom. He's a big hunter, and unfortunately put his hunting rifle in his mouth and took his life that way. Having been raised Catholic, I had always been told that suicide was a mortal sin. And if you took your own life, you'd go straight to hell, and all these other things. I know now that the Catholic Church has changed that since then, but that was the rule when I grew up as a kid. And I thought to myself, laying there, coming out of coma, how could he say that he was in a good place if, my belief system told me that he was going to hell? So that was kind of like the first big paradigm shift in my thinking that helped open my mind to the fact that how could a loving God ever condemn somebody, even if there is a hell, to something like that, away from the love and light of the divine creator for such a complex, complicated act, particularly when you're not, in your right mind on drugs. So that was the first part of what was happening there when I came out of coma. On the second day coming out of coma, Dr. Patel, the beautiful little Indian woman, came to my bedside. And it was kind of interesting because obviously I didn't know who any of these characters were. But she comes to my bedside. She started to talk to me, and she got very emotional about what she did that night, how many times she almost lost me. And then all of a sudden, the conversation shifted into something very personal. She started to talk about her father. And she said, Rob, 6 months ago, my father, he died suddenly. He had a brain aneurysm. And we were very, very, very close. He helped me through medical school. We were so close that I knew his thoughts. We knew when we were thinking about each other. And I was pregnant with my first child. And he just lived to see my son's face. That's all he lived for. And then he died unexpectedly. And she said, ever since then, I've kind of lost faith. And I'm a Hindu. I believe in the spirit world. I believe that God is protector, God is everything. But I haven't felt my father since then, and I've been very bitter about it. But seeing you here today gives me hope that maybe, just maybe, there's still something out there. And while I was laying there, all the puzzle came together, the puzzle unscrambled, and I realized what was going on because when Frosty came to me, another male spirit had entered the room. And over again, while Dr. Patel was working on me, I heard the same thing. Keep working on him. You can save him. Don't give up. Don't give up. Keep working on him. And it struck me while she was talking to me. And that's why she became so kind of weepy and talked about her father. I knew it was her father that was the one in the room encouraging her and giving her that spiritual energy. She didn't even know why she continued to work on me for 20 minutes. Something compelled her. And while she didn't necessarily hear his voice like I did, because I was right there close to the veil, she felt something that compelled her to keep working on me. So in that moment, what was curious is I said, this is the first time I ever met this woman. I'm not going to tell her about this. She's going to think I'm crazy. So I didn't tell Dr. Patel that that's what happened. I told Dr. Patel a year later when I came back from Chicago after a heart transplant. And I met her in the cafeteria of the hospital. I brought her a dozen roses and we sat down. And that's when I told her what happened. And to this day, on his birthday, we always talk. We always get a phone call and talk about how her father came to her that night and how it changed her life, knowing that he really never left her, that he's always with her. And when you think about it, one of the things that I've learned, one of the many things that I've learned through my near-death experience is that we're spiritual beings first, having a human experience. So when we think about these things, we have these kind of experiences like I did, and we hear of other people having these experiences. I personally used to think they were far-fetched as well. But now I understand that given the fact that we're spiritual energy, how is it so, unfathomable that this might happen? It's actually, should actually be considered ordinary. As these days progressed, I was told that my heart was completely destroyed, and the only way for me to survive was to get a heart transplant. So before they released me from the hospital, what they did was they put a defibrillator vest on me, which is every time my heart went out, this thing would shock me back and get the heart rhythm going. And then I was transferred to another hospital in Charlotte, actually, where they put a port in my chest. And there was a medicine called milrinone that was constantly dripping on my heart. Milrinone, my doctor explained it as kind of like STP for the heart. What it does is it makes the heart beat, but it also starts the clock ticking because the heart wears out very, very quickly. So I've got this clock ticking, this time bomb. So I've got this vest on, and I have a battery pack on my left shoulder that's that's got this vest, on me all the time. Then I got another battery pack on my right shoulder that's powering this port that's in my chest, squirting this medicine on my heart. So I'm like this cyborg creature from a science fiction movie walking around that's keeping me alive, trying to figure out how I can get a heart. So I went to all of the transplant centers here. There's one in Charlotte, North Carolina. There's one in Raleigh, North Carolina, at Duke Medical Center. And at the time, the only thing they can offer me was what was called an LVAD. And an LVAD is a machine where they actually drill a hole in your heart and they put a pump in there that just spins your blood around. And it's a very nasty device. It's particularly I was only 56, and these wires come out your body, and they're always getting infected, and it was just a horrible option. So I told them that I didn't want that option. I'd rather die naturally. So I was about to resign from my job. I work for a steel company. It's independently held out of Chicago, Illinois. And I called my boss and I told him that I needed a heart transplant and I couldn't come back to work. And he said, before you do that, because I'm one of their top salespeople, he said, before you do that, let me talk to the owner. And he talked to the owner, who I know had no idea was a philanthropist, and heart disease ran in his family, and he donated money to the University of Chicago Medicine. And it's kind of like one of these Hollywood moments where, an advocate comes out of nowhere and saves you. And I got a call from Michael Tang 2 days later, and he said, Rob, let me have a talk with the hospital, and I want to see if we can help you. And I got a call from a doctor, Dr. Uriel, who said to me, he said, Rob, if you come to Chicago, I should be able to transplant you within 3 to 4 months if there are no other issues that you have. So before you know it, my wife and I were on a plane. We arrived at the University of Chicago Medicine, and it was an amazing experience. When I walked through the door, Dr. Uriel saw me and he said, I have no idea how you're even walking around, but we'll do the best to save your life and we'll take it from here. And what was fascinating about this, Alan, is that, this is God's timing. It was just perfect. I met the transplant surgeon, an uncharacteristically tall Indian man, Dr. Juvanandan, who for the past 15 years had been working on a heart pump. And this heart pump was called a New Pulse, and it was about the size of a lunchbox. And he approached me and he said, listen, you probably won't make it until the donor heart arrives because hearts are in very short supply. So the trick is keeping you alive between now and then. And he said, the only thing we can possibly offer you is this experimental pump that I've been working on. And I said, okay, well, how does this thing work? And he said, we'll put a slight incision in your chest and we'll fish this tiny little skinny balloon down through your aorta. And at the bottom of that, we're going to drill a hole in the side of your body. And there's a titanium disc that we're going to sit behind your rib cage. And from there, these wires will come out and attach to the pump. And it's only the size of a lunchbox. You'll be able to carry it around with you. You can walk around the hospital, and this thing will keep you alive until a donor heart arrives. And I said, wow, that's really fantastic, Doc. I said, how many people have you had have had this thing? And he said, well, that's the only thing. He said, we've only experimented on cows and pigs with this pump. But he said, so you would be really our first human trial. And he said, we only need 3 weeks of data to take it to the FDA to get approval. So he said, but it's your only option. Long and short of it is I agreed to the heart pump, and I'm so glad that I did because now it's being used across the country. It has saved many lives, and many people actually are going home with the pump and wait for their donor heart instead of waiting in the hospital. So it was an extraordinary part of my experience. So even with the heart pump and the milrinone and everything else that they put in me to try to keep me alive, my heart was still failing. I had been in the hospital there for 3 months when one night I was on the 8th floor of the hospital facing Lake Michigan, and this really terrible storm whipped up. And I remember lying there, and this was kind of like, this is a very interesting part of my story because there were some other medical issues. I don't want to give all of those away. So the reader is not spoiled if they choose to read the book. But what had happened to me, Alan, is that I had a dark night of the soul moment. And this storm whipped up. And on the 8th floor, it's almost like you're in the sky and you're near the lake. So the rain was like really, really vicious. The clouds came in. A lot of lightning and these heavy sheets of rain were just banging against my window. It's, the middle of the night and I can't sleep. And all of a sudden, it was almost as if like all of your past mistakes in your life come rushing in. All this negative energy comes rushing in. And I felt like I was a magnet just pulling all of these things towards me. And I was tormented by some of my past mistakes and things like that. And before you know it, my heart went into tachycardia. The nurse came rushing in and she said, "There's no reason why your heart should be going into tachycardia. What's going on?" And they gave me some medicine and she left the room again. And I just, you get to a point, I was so tired of fighting. After fighting 20 years for my special needs child, I had these other health issues. My heart was giving out. I felt my spirit leaving my body. And I just collapsed in that moment and I cried out, "Do with me what you will." And in that moment, that's when I had my most profound near death experience. It's very difficult to articulate this and to explain what happened next. But I found myself standing in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of like the way I explain it is it's kind of like looking outside an airplane window on a clear day and all you see is blue skies, but you're really looking at nothing. You see everything, but nothing at all. And that was the first part of my experience. I found myself standing in the middle of nowhere and I could see myself down in the bed, this atrophied body. I'm about 174 pounds. I had atrophy down to about 131. I was a skeleton of a human being. And there I was lying there, this heart pump keeping me alive, all these IVs, wires coming out of me. So I'm looking down on myself. I could see myself there. And yet, while I'm standing in the middle of nowhere, I have the same green hospital gown on, but I'm whole. And I say to myself, what can possibly be going on here? What is happening? And in that moment, I realized that I was connected to the universe, the vast wisdom of the universe, all of it. It was almost as if someone had picked up the grains of my being and threw them into a strong wind and just scattered me across this infinite, timeless expanse of the universe. And it was such an amazing thing because while I was standing there in that place, I felt like all I had to do, if I had a question, all I had to do was think about it, and the answer came to me. It was in that place. I did not experience, I know that I've read some other near death experience since I've had mine, but there wasn't, the five senses had no functionality in that place. In other words, I couldn't smell anything or taste anything or feel anything or hear anything. It was just me standing in the middle of this timeless expanse. And having been raised Catholic, I was, I was disappointed that I did not see any divine being, which was an interesting part of my experience because I did not see angels. I did not see Jesus Christ. I did not see anything. But what I did feel and what was kind of imprinted on my spirit in a way that I wholly and completely understood, it was like their communication is telepathic. It's sensed and felt and then absorbed. That's how communication is. It's without words. That was my experience. And the Creator impressed upon me things like, I am omnipotent. This is the source of divine energy. This is your real identity. This is the power back of all things. And while I was in that place, I began to see complex mathematical equations just hanging there. And I thought to myself, wow, the laws that govern the universe are so simple, so elegant. And I understood in that place that I was not my body, my race, my religion. I was part of this love and light that is this expanse, this divine energy. And what happened next was so fascinating because then I saw and became part of this web of twinkling lights. And the way I describe this web, which is what the book is named after, it was trillions and trillions and trillions of neurons woven together in this beautiful tapestry of twinkling lights. And they just were infinite. And they just seemed to hang on the ceiling of the universe. And while I was in that place, I understood that, from science class, we remember that a neuron has a nucleus inside of it, and then it has the dendrites and the tentacles, and they all weave together the same way that, our brain is made, our heart is made, the solar system is made. But in that place, I realized that each little spark of light or quark, and quarks are the smallest building blocks of matter, which are made of light. And I understood in that place that this is how the divine creates. The divine creates with light. God uses light to transform and heal us, and also uses that same light energy, whether it's an animate or inanimate thing. All things are one. All things are, it's kind of like we're all made of the same stuff. And when you think about that, that's the recipe. Light is the recipe, whether it's photosynthesis for a plant, it really doesn't matter because this is how things manifest. These quarks combine and they create infinite possibilities in the universe. They can create a solar system, they can create a plant, a tree, a person, or a dog. It's all the same. And as I stood there, I realized that we're all connected. Everything is connected. We're all one. And that was the message. It was a message of oneness and unity. I had an experience of a couple of life reviews while I was standing in that place, connected to everything. And I thought to myself, loneliness is just an illusion. How can we be lonely when we're connected to everything? And it was a beautiful feeling to feel that oneness with everything in the universe. And I saw the nurses. I'm looking down on my atrophied body, and I saw the nurses running in and out of patients' room on my floor. And what was curious about this is that I only saw the nurses that I had made negative assumptions and judgments about, which was an incredible experience. Because, we all want to think that, oh, I'm not a judgmental person, I don't have any of these prejudiced thoughts, but unfortunately, we all do. That's part of our humanity. And I began to see these people that I had made these negative assumptions about, and something fascinating happened. It was like watching multiple television screens at once. So I saw their lives in a regression of events. And it was kind of like their lives were going backwards to who they were now, back to childhood. And it was almost as if every time there was a watershed event in their life, like abuse or a bad personal decision or an accident, something that happened out of their control, circumstances out of their control, it was as if this movie that was moving in high speed backwards to their birth would stop for a millisecond to give me a glimpse of what had happened to that person. And I understood that this was painting a portrait of who this person was now and why they had become who they are. And I thought to myself, how could I possibly judge these people so harshly? And at the same time, on a different screen, I saw my own life and I saw the things that I was most ashamed of and the mistakes that I had made in my life. And I forgave myself. in that moment. And I said, how could I have ever judged you so harshly? Because, when you think about it, we always we always are so much harder on ourselves than anybody else. And we, as human beings, we only act on the information that we have at the moment. So we make mistakes in our lives, and this whole life is an evolving process, of hopefully evolving towards something better, moving toward that light and that love, that place that we all come from. And after those life reviews, I had this moment of understanding humanity and this divine source of love and light that we all come from, this place that doesn't judge us. And I felt like I never wanted to leave that place. And then the most fascinating part for me was, I have a special needs child who has never been able to speak to me and who's suffered and struggled most of her life. And I saw her standing there in the middle of nowhere. She came out of that web, and there was Maria standing there. And when I saw her, in the temporal world, she can't stop writhing her hands. She can't speak to me. She's always having seizures. She's always struggling. And we've had a lot of moments together. There have been times in my life where I prayed that God would just take her and relieve her from all this pain. But when I saw her standing there in the middle of nowhere, and she had this light emanating through her, and it wasn't the kind of light, any kind of light that you and I can see. It was that spiritual light that animates all life. The same spiritual light comes from this divine source. And there she was, perfect and whole. And I said to her, Maria, your mother and I have taken you everywhere. We don't know what to do for you. We don't know how to comfort you anymore when you're having seizures. We've given up everything to try and heal you. And I've never heard your voice. I've never heard you say, I love you, Daddy. And in that moment, in that unspoken language of the ethereal, I said to her, tell me what I can do to comfort you. And she said three words that transformed my life. She said, just love me. And when she said, just love me, I cried out and screamed into that infinite expanse that I never want to leave this place. And when I said that, I found myself back in my hospital bed. This whole journey has just transformed my life in such beautiful ways. And I've learned one important thing, that the divine expresses and experiences life through us. And this is why I believe that this web that I experience there in the spiritual realm represents the light and dark struggle of all humanity through every age. It's kind of like a mirror. What we do here affects this spiritual web and vice versa. I really believe that. Some can call it karma, you can call it whatever you want. But that's why what we do here matters so much. And this is where purpose comes into the whole thing, because I believe that every one of us is born with this light inside of us. And that is our purpose. That's that talent or that mission or that gift that we have to express. And when I was in the web, I noticed that there were some dark parts of the web, some areas where human beings were not emanating light as much as they should. And when I was in the ethereal space and looking at this, I thought to myself, well, what is that? Why are there some dark parts of the web? And I came to understand that that's where we really weren't letting this divine energy shine through us as much as we should. We weren't living our purpose. And that's what I want. That's what I want the audience to learn from me. I lived 56 years not understanding what my purpose was. I had to die to figure it out. I don't want anyone else to have to go through that. I understand now why I had to die, because now I understand that writing this book, letting this person express through me, seeing the value of my daughter, seeing the value of all humanity, that we all come from the divine. We all have this potential to express with this bright light and live out our passion and our dream, but we've got to figure it out. We have a responsibility to figure out what our purpose is, because that's when our light, our quark, our spark shines the brightest, both on earth and in the spiritual realm. So this is the message that I wanted to communicate today, and I appreciate you having me and allowing me to do that.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that talk there with Rob Gentile. If you would like to take a little bit of a deeper dive into his near-death experience, I highly recommend you check out his book, Corks of Light. If this is your first time at the channel and you like what you saw, you can subscribe by clicking on my face right there. Alright, well, I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you next time.